There's one piece of advice for young people in their late teens and early 20s is that if you do things that you think are going to be fun in a healthy way, then it'll often lead you down the right path. Because I think most people, when they're positive and happy and enjoying themselves, tend to be more successful.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumi Tech and sponsored by Hippo Insurance, Turing, Upwest Labs, and Hillel at Stanford. Investing and advising. Meet Alex Oppenheimer. Alex's background is in mechanical engineering at Stanford, investment banking in Morgan Stanley, and then at NEA working on early-stage software investments. While at NEA, he became an expert in the SaaS business model and spent significant time with the portfolio companies on key strategic operational initiatives, in addition to making investments. He has been able to leverage his network and skill set to gain access to great early-stage companies as well, so decided to also raise money for a small venture fund. Alex Oppenheimer, thank you for joining me on 20-Minute Leaders. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. You're in Jerusalem right now, right?
I am. I've been in Jerusalem basically for a year now in the same office. So, but it's probably the best place to be. So, no complaints.
I love it. And your journey doesn't start in Jerusalem. It starts from Marine, right, in California. And you've gotten a chance to spend meaningful time both on the West Coast in Menlo Park and Stanford, but also on the East Coast with NEA, now in Jerusalem with a yeshiva in the middle in Israel, really on an extraordinary journey of both from, an intellectual perspective, getting all these different skill sets from mechanical engineering at Stanford to more of finance, both from home and also working at Morgan Stanley and then NEA, now an investor and advisor. So Alex, I can't think of anything better than to ask you to just walk me through, your life a little bit, and we'll touch on some key areas that I'm really excited to dive in and really get into the entrepreneurial mindset of what made you decide what you did and what are some insights that I can then take on with me as a young entrepreneur on my own journey.
Absolutely. So I will say at the end, I don't feel like I ever really became entrepreneurial or an entrepreneurial until I moved to Israel. So that was a big step for me to take it there. But going back to the beginning and even kind of like, I guess, the prologue, both my parents are from Queens, New York. My dad's parents are Holocaust survivors. And they moved to California, to Marin County in 1978 and have been there ever since. So I grew up in Marin, but always spending time going to New York to visit my grandparents. And it's actually funny, when I started at Stanford, a lot of people thought I was from New York, which is like not normal because half the school is from California. So, but for whatever reason, I've exuded that. And so I guess that kind of explains some of my journey east. So I grew up, my dad's a CFO in Silicon Valley, and he always did an amazing job of teaching me and including me from a young age and things that were going on, from IPOs to companies and stocks and everything in between. And that's really kind of how my journey started. At the same time, I was always a tinkerer. And when it came down to it, I had the opportunity to go to Stanford, and it did. And it was an amazing experience, as I'm sure you've experienced in the last couple of years. And I studied mechanical engineering, and people since have asked me why I chose to go to Stanford and why I chose to study mechanical engineering. And the answer is actually very simple. It's just what I thought I would have the most fun doing. And I think that if there's one piece of advice for young people in their late teens and early 20s, is that if you do things that you think are going to be fun in a healthy way, then it'll often lead you down the right path. Because I think most people, when they're positive and happy and enjoying themselves, tend to be more successful. And so I was the great beneficiary of that at Stanford, and studying mechanical engineering, getting to, it's a very hands-on program. So we're in the machine shop building stuff, working in teams, doing problem sets until the middle of the night, and had a great experience at Stanford. I'll accelerate a little bit. So didn't go far after graduating from Stanford, worked at Morgan Stanley in Menlo Park. Obviously the highlight there was working on the Facebook IPO. Did a whole bunch of other stuff that most people probably would have never heard of. but everyone's heard of Facebook and the IPO in 2012. So that was most of my first year. Within,
yeah, like you can't just skim past that. You're finishing Stanford. You're in Menlo Park and Morgan Stanley. And you're working now on Facebook's IPO. You're holding a position that thousands, if not millions, of others would love to have that extraordinary experience of helping take that company public from an investor's perspective, a third party perspective. Tell me a little bit about what's that like, being thrown into the deep end and managing both a lot of responsibility, but also quickly having to accelerate your understanding into the market, into how the big players do it. Getting to experience one of the craziest IPOs that we have until today.
Well, I'll kind of start that with a story. So the Facebook team when I was at Morgan Stanley was really only 5 people. It was the managing director, the executive director, an associate, and 2 analysts. And that was really the whole team that was covering Facebook. I mean, they were covering Facebook long before I started. But when I started, and I got pulled onto the team after 3 weeks at Morgan Stanley, and it was one of those moments where like kind of not quite the drama of like your life flashing before your eyes, but when my staffer said, hey, you worked with this person on this, they want you to join the Facebook team. It was kind of like, this is an opportunity I have to jump on. This will be a story that I'll tell, for the rest of my life probably. And obviously it has been, and it was a very interesting experience. And I think that one of the conclusions of it is that like, there aren't shortcuts. Like the way that we ended up being lead left on that deal, and the way that it all worked out was really just, hard work and some creativity. And I give Michael Grimes at Morgan Stanley a ton of credit. I think the last time he was in the news was, it said, oh, he was an Uber driver in order to get the Uber IPO. And anyone that worked with him or knows him was like, yeah, obviously. Like, how else would you do it? And it's just, don't think you're too high and mighty to do anything. Put your head down and really understand and show that you care, and be just a little bit creative, and it really goes a long way.
Amazing. I love that. And I think that one of the things that we'll see a pattern throughout this conversation is this idea of jumping on opportunities and getting excited about them, and being humble enough to accept that while there is somewhat of this like fairy tale trajectory of where you think you need to end up, or in every point in the road to reach that big milestone, that's not actually how it works. It's about those real experiences, those tangible experiences of being that Uber driver to understand the magnitude of an Uber IPO. I think that's exactly the lesson that I'm trying to gain through this show. So take me forward a little bit. You have some decisions that you have to make. Part of them, are obvious. Some of them are not so obvious.
Yeah, and frankly, very few things I think seem obvious when you're in the middle of them. I grew up in a very, I guess I would say stereotypical upper middle class Jewish family in Marin County, and it's very, very intense. I went to prep school, I went to Stanford, I worked in banking, and you try to do all the things that you're supposed to do, and open all the doors and keep every door open. And one of the kind of ideas that I've recognized is that, at a certain point you have to walk through a door. And it's a very hard thing for a young person to do, to actually walk through a door, because anytime you walk through a door, you're effectively closing doors behind you. And so, when I chose to kind of go the earlier stage route out of banking and go to NEA rather than taking the, mega fund private equity route at like a TPG or Silver Lake, I was kind of like, I'm never going to end up there now. And I had to sit with that decision and be like, okay, you know what? That's okay. Because this is what I feel, and I feel this for good reasons. And I want to work with earlier companies, and this is the type of, organization I want to be a part of. And that's been kind of a major theme. But at the end of the day, like, you typically end up where it makes sense anyway, even if the path isn't the most obvious, and regardless of how kind of like stressful it might seem along the way. But usually things tend to work themselves out in a way that in hindsight makes a lot of sense.
So early stage growth equity versus private equity. Walk me through a little bit about your thoughts as to why you specifically were passionate about going more of the early route rather than the private route.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that had worked in my office at Morgan Stanley before I did had gone to TPG. There's a lot of Morgan Stanley alumni at the TPG office in San Francisco. And that was kind of like the thing to do. And it's an amazing team, and they do amazing stuff, and they've continued to be extremely successful. And one of the things I realized was that when I looked at their day to day and the macro of what they were doing, it actually lacked some of the things I liked about banking. And it's very easy. Banking was really tough. I mean, it's tough for most people. It was extremely tough for me. And it's very easy to be like, oh, I didn't like any part of it. But there were parts of it that I really did like. And I think that there started to be a pattern that the things that I liked working on several things that were related but different all at the same time. And I liked having milestones very quickly. So, working on an IPO that, 10 months later is public, and working on an M&A deal that in 3 months gets announced and it's a public to public M&A deal. It actually was kind of like studying mechanical engineering in some ways too, where in my first year at Morgan Stanley, I did a software company M&A deal, an internet company IPO, and a semiconductor debt deal. And it was kind of like when I was at Stanford studying mechanical engineering, where I was taking solid mechanics, heat transfer, and a design course all at the same time. And they're all related, and you all take things from each other, but it's fast paced. It's a lot of learning, and you kind of get to see the connections between these things. And so for me, that was a major theme of what I wanted in my next job. And again, zoom forward, I guess like 8 years now. Actually, 9 years ago was when I was interviewing at NEA and other firms, and I was able to realize that. And sure enough, that's really still how my brain works and what I like doing now. Is a lot of different things that are all loosely related to each other, and really getting those. Frankly, I like the interim milestones. I like announcing deals. I like making stuff happen. So yeah.
Make stuff happen. A lot of loosely tied ideas that are coming in together to something greater than that. And what I'm particularly also curious about then is your decision to take 6 months, join a yeshiva in Israel. A lot of people out of the army, where I'm my trajectory. We go on these like 6-month, year-long trips around the world to experience to learn different things, especially about ourselves. So you took a different type of trip, and you did that in the middle of your career, literally as you're booming, as you're getting all these crazy opportunities. You take a step back and you go again to study something a little bit different. So tell me about that experience.
Absolutely. So, like I said, I grew up with the grandparents who are Holocaust survivors. Always grew up feeling very Jewish, but not doing a lot of kind of practical stuff. The Passover, the Hanukkah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But always had a lot of Jewish pride. When I got to Stanford, I actually got more involved in Jewish stuff, which is kind of the case, I think, with most American kids that go to college. They get just more involved in things that they have affinity towards. Started going to Shabbat dinners, and then moved to Washington, D.C., and really started connecting a lot more with Jewish learning, and was on a trajectory. So after 2 years at NEA, I had an amazing 2 years at NEA. I got there when we were in the middle of Fund 14, which was we deployed very aggressively into some amazing companies. We had a very small team. I did 10 deals in my first year, I think, at NEA, Series A, B, and C, enterprise software, and worked mostly with two different people. One was a guy named Peter Barris, and another guy named Harry Weller. And they were just fantastic mentors. I would work on deals with them, join boards with them, and got to just listen and pick their brain and try to understand, based on their decades of wisdom, why they were doing what they're doing, which was like the greatest experience you could ask for. And I'll never forget, it was June of 2015, and I was actually headed out to an event, and I had an Uber waiting for me downstairs. And I was walking by Harry's office, and he said, "Oh, do you have a second?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I have a second. Let's chat." And he was like, "Look, you've been here for 2 years. We really like you. We want you to stay." I was like, "That's amazing. I love it here. I'm learning a lot. It's fantastic. The people are impressive, and they're good people." And, he said, "But hey, if you want to go to business school, great. We'll send you to business school. You want to go work at a portfolio company, great. We'll set that up." I said, "Hey, how about going and taking 6 months, going to Israel and learning in yeshiva?" And he said, "What's a yeshiva?" And, it was a really interesting process then of kind of explaining why this time away and the ability to take time for myself to do some introspection after, high school, which is intense, and college is intense, and banking is super intense. And then 2 years at NEA where I was on a plane or a train basically every week and running around just to take some time and understand, okay, let's take stock. Who am I? Where am I going? What do I really care about? And Harry and Peter were just incredibly supportive of that idea. And I give them an amazing amount of credit for making that happen. Even at times, there was one moment I'll never forget. And I actually wrote, unfortunately, tragically, Harry passed away a few months after I left NEA and moved to Israel. But I wrote about him. And, there was a point where I was getting very nervous about leaving. One of the rules, like, you get a seat in venture, don't give up your seat because you don't know if it'll be there when you get back. And I was getting very nervous. And Harry comes by my office. I was like, oh, Harry, this thing, and like, I'll still go to the board meeting. And he just says to me, he says, like, shut up. You are going to yeshiva. Do not speak to me again until you book your flight. And it was just such a, I'm so grateful to have such an amazing mentor and guide and such a clear signal. And I went to yeshiva for 6 months. I was in Jerusalem in a yeshiva called Machon Shlomo for guys like me, and went back to NEA very smoothly. And a month in, Harry comes over to me and says, I want to know what you did over there, because whatever it was, it worked. You got what I wanted you to get out of the experience. Whoa. And it was amazing. And, I frankly, I came back with an itch to come to Israel, and Harry knew I had that itch, and the opportunity popped up. And in late 2016, I got on an airplane and made Aliyah, and been here since.
Unbelievable. I just love that. What did you learn in the yeshiva? What did you experience? Something that's so unique that so few get to experience, so few in Israel get to experience, right? I mean, it's a very different type of learning and experiential being. So tell me, I really am curious about what it really is like, and how did what did Harry see in you after those 6 months that made him reflect back about your experience?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. I don't want to take anything away from the fact that just like being able to step away and get away from the stress of work and the hustle and just having that space is important. But to really kind of move forward rather than just kind of like hunker down and, go sit on a beach somewhere, which is what my dad suggested I do. What was the difference? And, I had the great opportunity of going to this yeshiva called Machon Shlomo, which is run by and filled with people who have similar backgrounds to myself. And I'm trying to think of the most concise way to explain this, but there's an emphasis on kind of, again, personal growth and an openness. And I think I read a book in my first year in yeshiva called Mindset by Carol Dweck, who's actually a professor at Stanford. And she walks through in a very practical way the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And I think that coming from prep school to Stanford to investment banking, you really get trained in the fixed mindset, and it becomes hardwired. And you can read her book and say, yeah, obviously the growth mindset is better. But to really shift your mindset, you need an environment that fosters that. And I think that being in a yeshiva where open conversation, surrounded by people who have all made the same or similar choice that I have to, step away from whatever they were doing, take the time, come to Israel, want to work on themselves, and then have the resources of an amazing set of rabbis, and obviously an incredible, you have like cheat codes for life in the Gemara and in Musar and in Chumash, and it's just. And then coming back to NEA, what Harry saw was I had a higher level of clarity, a higher level of understanding and thoughtfulness, and I was able to communicate a lot more effectively what I had going on in my head. I was just able to parse through complicated things in a more effective way.
I love that, and I think that at the end that's what we all strive for, right? I think that I remember when I was introduced to Maslow's pyramid of needs back in 9th grade. I remember looking and I was like, wow, like this is awesome. Like at the end, none of it matters. It's all about that fulfillment. It's all about that personal, feeling that we've reached that milestone, that we're content. That at the end, what everybody wants is to just have a good night's sleep and feel good about their life and feel happy about the good that they're doing for others. And it sounds to me like that experience is something that it just helped reach that goal, right? It wasn't centered around your professionalism or your ability to make better investments, but it was about the ability for you to harness, the different adversities that are going on and the different things that are important to you, and that clarity, which is something that I'm very intentional about and something that I focus on. And so I just love that. I just love that experience and that example. Very inspiring.
It's amazing. I still remember the first time I did any kind of real Torah class after Hebrew school, which was kind of a joke, but I was at Stanford with Rabbi came in and we did this Maimonides class. And I remember being 20 years old and taking the kind of like basics of Rambam and thinking to myself at age 20, like, wow, this is really relevant to my life as a 20-year-old, like as a college sophomore who's basically just a joker having a good time doing problem sets, You're like, wow, this is really relevant. And it turns out that like there's real wisdom there. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Alex, all of that leads up to the fact that today you're doing incredible work in so many different tech ecosystems, and I'm inspired by seeing you work with the different companies. You're either investing, advising, or both in multitude of companies that I just love and respect. And so I think we need to do another episode just on that. But I was just inspired to hear about your life journey, and 20 minutes go by so fast. So thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you for sharing with me your journey, and I can't wait to hear the next part in the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you 30 seconds on what I'm doing now, which is, the truth is, and I developed this when I was at NEA, I just love working with companies. Frankly, the earlier, the better. I've been the great beneficiary of being in front of a lot of successful entrepreneurs, learning a lot and being a kind of collection vessel for a lot of that wisdom. And that's what I try to share with all my companies. And what I try to bring. And if I'm an advisor or an investor or whatever it may be, that's what I love doing.
I love it. Alex, thank you so much. The last question, the most important one, 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Okay, so I think that you have to think about what's aspirational versus what's like what other people would say. I think one thing that comes to mind is probably quantitative. I'm definitely a numbers guy. I try to bring numbers to things that don't naturally espouse that. The other thing I would say is that I'm fun. I try to have a good time with what I'm doing, even if other people are like, "Really, you like spreadsheets that much?" And then I try to do fun with a lot more than spreadsheets. And then I guess I would say people would say that I'm direct. I kind of get straight to it. Try to be efficient and in that way. So
I love it. Alex, thank you very much. Toda rabba. Enjoy time. I can't wait to come and see you in Jerusalem. And thank you for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Take care.